A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away.
Star Wars, Death Star, by Michael Reaves and Steve Perry, 2007. Focusing on Death Star crew members, the novel spans 3 years concluding with the Battle of Yavin. Created and read by The Archivist Publishing. Preface. The Death Star's name says it all, with bone-chilling accuracy. It is a virtual world unto itself, equipped with uncanny power for a singularly brutal purpose, to obliterate entire planets in the blink of an eye. Its annihilation of the planet Alderaan, at the merciless command of Grand Moff Tarkin, lives in infamy. And its own ultimate destruction at the hands of Luke Skywalker is the stuff of legend. But what is the whole story? And who are the players behind the creation of this world-killing satellite of doom? The near extermination of the Jedi Order cleared the way for Palpatine, power-hungry senator and Sith Lord, to seize control of the Republic, declare himself Emperor, and usher in a fearsome totalitarian regime. But even with the dreaded Darth Vader enforcing Palpatine's sinister will, the threat of rebellion still looms, and the Emperor knows that only abject fear and the ability to punish dissent with devastating consequences can ensure his unchallenged control of the galaxy. Enter ambitious and ruthless government official Wilhuff Tarkin, architect of the Emperor's terrifying dream come true. From inception to completion, construction of the unprecedented Death Star is awash in the intrigues, hidden agendas, unexpected revelations, and daring gambits of those involved on every level. The brightest minds and boldest egos, the most ambitious and corrupt, the desperate and the devious, all have a stake in the Death Star and its potential to control the fate of the galaxy. Soldiers and slaves, loyalists and rebels, spies and avengers, the innocent and the evil, all their paths and fates will cross and intertwine as the Death Star moves from its maiden voyage to its final showdown. And a shadowy chapter of Star Wars history is stunningly illuminated in a thrilling, unforgettable adventure.
That's no moon. It's a space station.
Obi-Wan Kenobi. Part 1. Construction. Chapter 1.
Flight deck. Imperial Class Star Destroyer Steel Talon. Polar Orbit. Planet Despair. Horus System. Etribus Sector. Outer Rim Territories.
The alert siren screamed, a piercing wail that couldn't be ignored by any being on board with ears and a pulse. It had one thing to say, and it said it loud and clear. Scramble. Lieutenant Commander Villian, Dance, came out of a deep sleep at the blaring alarm, sat up and leapt from his rack to the expanded metal deck of the ready room quarters. Save for the helmet, he already wore his spacesuit. One of the first things an on-call TIE pilot learned to do was sleep in full battle gear. He ran for the door, half a step ahead of the next pilot to awaken. He grabbed his headgear, darted into the hall and turned to the right, then sprinted for the launching bay. It could be a drill. There had been plenty of those lately to keep the pilots on their toes. But maybe this time it wasn't. One could always hope. Vil ran into the assembly area. A-grav on the flight deck was kept at slightly below 1G, so that the pilots, all of whom were human or humanoid, could move a little faster and get to their stations a little sooner. The smell of launch lube was acrid in the cold air, and the pulsing lights painted the area in bright primary flashes. Techs scrambled, getting the TIE fighters to final set for takeoff, while pilots ran toward the craft. Vil noticed that it was just his squad being scrambled. Must not be a big problem, whatever it was. Command always said it didn't matter which unit you got. TIE fighters were all the same, down to the last nut and bolt. But even so, every pilot had his or her favorite ship. You weren't supposed to personalize them, of course, but there were ways to tell. A scratch here, a scuff mark there. After a while, you got to where you knew which fighter was which, and no matter what command said, some were better than others. A little faster, a little tighter in the turns. The laser cannons a hair quicker to fire when you touch the stud. Vil happened to know that his assigned ship this rotation was Black 11, one of his favorites. Maybe it was pure superstition, but he breathed just a little easier, knowing that particular craft had his name on it this time around. The command officer on deck, Captain Rax Exeter, waved Vil over.
Cap, what's up? Another drill?
Negative, Lieutenant. A group of prisoners somehow managed to take over one of the new Lambda-class shuttles. They're trying to get far enough away to make the jump to hyperspace. That isn't going to happen on my watch. The ID codes and tracking will be in your fighter's computer. Don't let 'em get away, son.
No, sir. What about the crew?
Vil knew the shuttles carried only a pilot and co-pilot.
Assumed dead. These are bad guys doing this dance. Traitors and murderers. That's reason enough to cook them, but we do not want them getting away to tell anybody what the Empire is doing out here, do we?
No, sir.
Go, Lieutenant, go!
Vil nodded, not bothering to salute, then turned and ran. As he did, he put his helmet on and locked it into place. The hiss of air into his face was metallic and cool as the suit system went online. It felt very comforting. The vac suit's extreme temp-resistant weave of durasteel and plastoid, along with the polarizing Densicris helmet, were the only things that would protect him from hard vacuum. Suit failure could make a strong man lose consciousness in under 10 seconds and die in under a minute. He'd seen it happen. TIE fighters, in order to save mass, had no defensive shield generators, no hyperdrive capability, and no emergency life support systems. They were thus fragile, but fast, and that was fine with Vil. He'd rather dodge enemy fire than hope it would bounce off. There was no skill in piloting some lumbering chunk of durasteel. Might as well be sitting with your feet up at a turbo laser console back on the ship. Where was the fun in that? The TIE tech had the hatch up on Black 11 as Vil arrived at the gantry above the ship. It was the work of an instant to clamber down and into the fighter's snug cockpit. The hatch came down and hissed shut. Vil touched the power-up stud, and the inside of the TIE, named for the twin-ion engine that drove it, lit up. He scanned the controls with a quick and experienced eye. All systems were green. The tech raised his hand in question. Vil waved back.
Go! Copy that, ST-11. Prepare for insertion.
Vil felt his lips twitch in annoyance. The Empire was determined to erase all signs of individuality in its pilots, on the absurd theory that nameless, faceless operators were somehow more effective. Thus, the classification numbers, the anonymous flight suits and helmets, and the random rotation of spacecraft. The standardizing approach had worked reasonably well in the Clone Wars, but there was one important difference here. Neither Vil nor any other TIE pilot that he knew of was a clone. None of the members of Alpha Squad had any intention of being reduced to automata. If that was what the Empire really wanted, let them use droid pilots and see how well that worked. His musing was interrupted by the small jolt of the cycling rack below the gantry kicking on. Vil's ship began to move toward the launching bay door. He saw the tech check that his own helmet was locked down. Already the bay pumps were working full blast, depressurizing the area. By the time the launch doors were open, the air would be cycled. Vil took a deep breath, readying himself for the heavy hand of G-force that would push him back into the seat when the engines hurled him forward. Launch Control's voice crackled in his headphones.
Alpha Squad Leader, stand by for launch. Copy.
Vil said. The launch doors pulled back with tantalizing slowness. The hydraulic thrum of their movement made audible by conduction through the floor and Black 11's frame.
You are go for launching. 5, 4, 3, 2, go!
Outside the confines of the Star Destroyer, the vastness of space enveloped Lieutenant Vil Dance as the ion engines pushed the TIE past the last stray wisps of frozen air and into the infinite dark. He grinned. He always did. He couldn't help it.
Back where I belong,
he thought. The flat blackness of space surrounded him. Behind him, he knew, the steel Talon was seemingly shrinking as they pulled away from it. Down, and to port, was the curvature of the prison planet. Though they were in polar orbit, Despayer's axial tilt showed more of the night side than day. The dark hemisphere was mostly unrelieved blackness, with a few lonely lights here and there. Vil flicked his comm. Though it came on automatically at launch, a good pilot always toggled it just to be sure.
Alpha Squad, pyramid formation on me as soon as you are clear,
he said.
Go to Tactical Channel 5, that's TAC Fiver, and log in.
Vil switched his own comm channel to 5. It was a lower-powered band with a shorter range, but that was the point. You didn't want the enemy overhearing you. And in some cases, it wasn't a good idea for the comm officer monitoring you back on the base ship to be privy to conversations either. They tended to be a bit more informal than the Empire liked. There came a chorus of,
Copy, Alpha Leader. Copy that. Copy, Alpha Leader. Copy. That's a copy.
From the other 11 pilots in his squad as they switched over to the new channel. It took only a few seconds for the last fighter to launch, and only a few more for the squad to form behind Vil.
What's the drill, Vil?
That from Benjo, aka ST-12, his second-in-command and right panel man.
Alpha Squadron, we have a Lambda-class shuttle captured by prisoners. They are running for hyper. Either they give up and come back, or we dust them. Lambda-class? That's one of the new ones, right? They have any guns?
Vil sighed. That was Rar Aniel, a Corellian like Vil himself, but not somebody you'd want to hold up as a prime example of the human species.
Don't you bother to read the boards at all, Aniel? I was just about to do that, sir, when the alarm went off. Was looking right at him. Had the latest notices right in my hand, sir.
The other pilots laughed, and even Vil had to grin. Aniel was a foul-up everywhere except in the cockpit, but he was a good enough pilot that Vil was willing to give him some slice. His sensor screen pinged, giving him an image of their quarry. He altered course to intercept.
Anybody else behind on his homework, listen up,
he said.
The Lambda-class shuttle is 20 meters long, has a top speed of 1400 Gs, a Class 1 hyperdrive, and can carry 20 troops in full battle gear, probably a couple more convicts in civvies. The ship carries 3 double blaster cannons and 2 double laser cannons. It can't accelerate worth a weep and it turns slower than a comet, but if you get in its sights, it can blow you to itty-bitty pieces. It would be embarrassing to have to inform your family you got shot apart by a shuttle, so stay alert.
There came another chorus of acknowledgments.
Copy, sir. Yes, sir. No sweat. Aniel, I didn't hear your response. Oh, sorry, sir. I was taking a little nap. What was the question?
Before the squad commander could reply, the shuttle suddenly loomed ahead. It was running as silently as possible with no lights, but as its orbit brought it across the Terminator and out of Despayer's night side, the sunlight struck rays from its hull.
There is our target, 4 kilometers dead ahead. I want a fast flyby so they can see us, and then I want a fountain pattern dispersal and loop, 2 clicks minimum distance and brackets, 1, 4, 4, and 2. You know who you are. I'll move in close and have a word with whomever they have flying the stolen spacecraft.
Benjo.
Oh, Lieutenant, come on. Let us have a shot, too.
Negative. If you had a clue about the vessel, I might. But since you're just as likely to shoot each other as the quarry, you'll hold the bracket.
More acknowledgments, but without much enthusiasm. He couldn't blame his squad. They hadn't had any action except drills since they'd been assigned to this project. But his secondary goal was to bring all his men back alive. The primary, of course, was to accomplish their mission. He didn't need a squad for this. Any fighter pilot worth his spit should be able to deal with a lumbering shuttle, even one with the new vehicle smell still in it. The Lambda's Delta V wasn't all that efficient, but with constant drive, it could get above the solar plane and far enough out of the planet's gravity well to engage its hyperdrive fairly soon. And once it was in the chute, they'd never find it. But that wasn't going to happen. The pyramid-shaped formation zipped past the fleeing shuttle. Close enough for Vil to see the pilot sitting in the command seat. He didn't look surprised, of course. He would have seen them coming on the sensors. But he couldn't outrun them, couldn't dodge, and no way could he take out a full squad of TIE fighters, even if he was the best gunner who'd ever lived. Not in that boat. And anyway, Vil wasn't going to give him the opportunity to try. The squad flowered into the dispersal maneuver as ordered, looping out and away to their assigned positions, angled pressor beams in their arrays providing maneuverability. Vil pulled a high G-tight turn and came around to parallel the shuttle a few hundred meters away, slightly above it. He watched the wing turrets closely. As soon as they started to track him, he jinked to port, then to starboard, slowed, then sped up. They tried to keep up with him, but they were a hair too slow. Vil toggled to a wideband channel. They'd hear this back in the destroyer, he knew.
Attention shuttle RLH-1. Turn the craft around and proceed immediately to Star Destroyer, Steel Talon's tractor beam range.
There was no answer. Nothing but the slight hiss of the carrier.
Shuttlecraft, do you copy my transmission?
Another pause. Then,
Yeah, we hear you, Rocket Jock. We aren't of a mind to do that.
Vil looked at his control panel. They were 2 minutes away from minimum safe distance, the point far enough from despair where they could safely attempt the jump to light speed. Jump too close to a planet's gravity well and the shift would tear the vessel apart. If the guy he was talking to had enough skill to fly the shuttle, he'd know that. His control panel would tell him when he reached MSD, and then it would be over. Lieutenant Dance would have failed a mission for the first time.
Never happen,
He thought.
Turn it around or we will fire.
He said.
You do that, just blow us apart. Essentially, murder 15 men and 2 women. One of them is old enough to be your granny. You can live with that.
He was stalling for time, Vil knew. The beings on that shuttle were bad enough to have been sent to the galaxy's #1 prison planet, and the Imperial courts didn't bother to do that with petty thieves or traffic violators. His granny hadn't robbed any banks or killed anybody. Not that he knew of, anyway.
Shuttle pilot, I say again.
Vil saw the port turret on the shuttle open up. He cut across the craft's flight path, angling away aft as the starboard gun began firing. He hit his thrusters full, coming up in a half loop and twist away from the incoming laser fire. Even a good gunner couldn't have spiked him at this angle, and these guys weren't anywhere close to good enough. Still, the pulsed incandescent beams came close.
Lieutenant?
That from Benjo.
Hold your position, Alpha Squad. There's no problem here.
Cool and calm, like discussing what they might be having for dinner. He zipped Black 11 out of range. The clock was running down, less than a minute to MSD.
Last chance, shuttle. Turn it around now.
In answer, the pilot pulled the shuttle topward so his gunners could get a better angle. They started shooting again. The shots were wild, but there was always a chance a stray beam could hit you, even by accident. And wouldn't that be a glorious end to an unblemished career, to be killed by a convict on a milking shuttle.
Enough of this,
he thought. Vil hit the drive controls and damped the thrust to 0. Then he pushed the throttles to full, angled to port and topside, did a roll and loop and came around, driving at the shuttle amidships. He pressed the fire control button. Black 11 spat twin laser bolts from the low-temp tips. Vil Dance was a better-than-average shooter. The bolts ripped into the shuttle, chewed it up. And as he overflew and peeled away to starboard downside, the Lambda blew apart. Shattering into at least half a dozen large pieces and hundreds of smaller ones amid a cloud of flash-frozen air, liquid, and debris. And pinwheeling bodies. Vil switched back to TAC 5.
NEL Lude, move in and check for survivors.
He kept his voice calm, emotionless. No big deal. His pulse was racing, but they didn't have to know that. Let them think his heart pumped liquid oxy.
None of them were wearing suits, Lieutenant.
Lude said a moment later.
No survivors. Too bad about that brand new ship. Good hit, Vil.
Benjo said.
Congratulations.
Vil felt a warm glow of satisfaction. It had been a good hit. And they'd been firing at him, so it wasn't like shooting Yorks in a canister. It had been a righteous response. He switched back to the main op-chan.
Fighter Control, this is ST-11 Lieutenant Vil Dance of TIE Fighter Alpha Squadron. Mission accomplished. You might want to send out a recovery vessel to pick up the pieces.
Copy. ST-11,
said Captain Exeter.
Good job.
Thank you, sir. Let's return to base, Alpha Squad.
Vil smiled as he waited for his team to form up again. This was the best job in the galaxy, being a fighter pilot. He couldn't imagine a better one. He was young, not even 25 yet, and already a legend among his peers, and among the ladies as well. Life was good. As they started for the destroyer, Vil saw in the distance the frame of the gigantic battle station that was being built in planetary orbit. They were 100 kilometers away from the structure, and it was still skeletal, its interior construction only just begun. But even so, it looked impossibly huge at this distance. It was to be the size of a small moon when it was finished, dwarfing the largest star destroyer. Incredible to think about. And if he kept racking up missions like the one just completed, there was a very good chance that he would be assigned as unit commander on board the new station. He led his squad back to the equatorial launching bay. Looking at the awe-inspiring base, he felt a surge of pride in the Empire, and a feeling of gratitude at being a part of the Tarkin Doctrine's glorious mission. There was no official appellation or designation other than Battle Station that he knew of for the Grand Moff's vision. But there was a name for it that everybody he knew, officers and enlisted alike, used. They called it the Death Star. Chapter 2.
LQ flagship Avalon in geosynchronous orbit above planet Despair.
Wilhuff Tarkin, now Grand Moff Tarkin, with that exalted promotion being due to this very project, stood before the deck-to-ceiling transparasteel viewport on the observation deck, looked out at his creation, and found it good. He was building a world. True, as worlds went, what was taking form 300 kilometers from his flagship would not be quite as imposing as Imperial Center, say, or Alderaan. But when finished, it would be larger than 2 of the satellites of his own planet Eriadu, and it would be home to well over 1 million beings. More to the point, it would hold countless worlds under his thrall. It had been nearly 3 decades since Wraith Sinar had first made Tarkin privy to the concept of the Battle Station planetoid, and it had taken almost a decade to get the idea through the snarls of red tape and bring the Geonosians on board to improve and implement the designs. The project had been known by various code names, such as the Great Weapon, and the original plans had been much improved by the Geonosian leader Poggle the Lesser. But it had taken years for the concept to be stewarded through the tortuous maze of government bureaucracy before construction was finally ordered to begin. There were still flaws in the original plans, but many of them had been addressed during the building of the proof-of-concept prototype in the Maw installation, and others were being corrected as they were uncovered. The greatest minds in the galaxy had been recruited or drafted to lend their expertise to the building of this ultimate weapon. The brilliant Dr. Oron Keldor, the mad weapons master Umak Leth, the young but nevertheless laser-sharp Amwati prodigy Quicksucks, the Twi'lek administrator Tal Sivron. They, and many, many others of like stripe, had been investigated and approved by Tarkin himself. All were as good as the Empire could provide, willing or unwilling. In addition, he had conscripted a veritable army of enslaved Wookiees, plus tens of thousands of convicts from the steaming jungles of the prison planet Despair, and a plethora of construction droids, the latter the largest such collection of automata ever assembled. All of them, organic and artificial, now worked around the chrono with but one goal in mind, the culmination of his vision. The project, codenamed Death Star. Tarkin pursed his lips slightly. There was a taint of melodrama to the name that he didn't care for, but no matter. The words, along with the reality of the battle station itself, would amply convey its terrifying purpose. The Horus system had been scavenged for raw material. Asteroids and comets were being harvested from both the inner and outer belts and broken into components of oxygen, hydrogen, iron, nickel, and other elements. Enormous bulk transports, ore haulers, tankers, and cargo craft had been gutted and reconfigured as orbiting laboratories, factories, and housing, all filled with workers producing fiber optics, electronics, and thousands of other technological instruments and construction materials. After nearly 2 decades of frustration, of false starts, union disputes, administrative procedure, and political maneuvering, the construction of the Empire's doomsday device was at last irrevocably underway. Certainly there had been problems. Tarkin had been surprised and annoyed to find that Wraith Sinar's original designs, the very same ones he himself had presented to Palpatine, and which the Emperor had rejected more than 10 years earlier, had been the basis for the plans Palpatine had finally given him to implement. Well, perhaps it wasn't so surprising, given the vagaries of war and politics. Nothing that went into the Empire's vaults was ever completely lost, although sometimes things were mislaid, and concepts rejected when they came from someone else often looked better when rethought as one's own. Even the Emperor, it seemed, was not immune to that particular hubris. After a prototype design had been built and refined in the heart of the swarm of black holes known as the Maw Cluster, Tarkin and Bevel Lemelisk, the head of design, had the Death Star project moved several times to avoid possible rebel sabotage attempts, ultimately relocating it to the Horus system for added security. Of course, on a project this huge, there was little hope that it could be kept secret forever. But knowing that it existed, even knowing where it was being built, was not the same as being able to do anything about it. Admiral Dela, commanding 4 Imperial-class Star Destroyers and countless smaller attack craft, kept constant vigilance from her station within the Maw. Any unauthorized ships that entered the region would not leave to carry tales elsewhere. Tarkin stared at the incomplete spheroid, floating serenely in the void, eerily backlit by the solar glow reflected from Despair. It wasn't even a complete skeleton yet. When done, however, the battle station would be 160 kilometers in diameter. There would be 24 zones, 12 in each hemisphere. Every zone, called a sprawl, would have its own food replicators, hangar bays, hydroponics, detention blocks, medical centers, armories, command centers, and every other facility needed to provide service for any mission deemed necessary. In an emergency, Auxiliary command centers located in each sprawl provided full weapons and maneuverability control for a redundancy depth of twice a dozen. When fully operational, the battle station would be the most powerful force in the galaxy by far. And it was Tarkin's to command. As the commander of such a vessel, he would perforce be the most powerful man in the galaxy. The thought had certainly occurred to him that not even the Emperor could stand before him, did he choose to challenge Palpatine's rule. Then again, Tarkin knew the Emperor. If their positions were reversed, he knew that there was no possible way he would sanction anyone having such power, not without some kind of fail-safe. Was a destruct device already built into the station somewhere, with the red button safely installed in Palpatine's chambers? Was some equivalent of Order 66, known only to certain onboard officers and troops? Or was it something even more devious? Tarkin was certain the Emperor had some kind of insurance against any theoretical rebellion. Not that the Grand Moff intended such a course. He wasn't a foolish or suicidal man. Aside from the fearsome world-destroying super laser itself, which was based upon the Hammer Tong project, and used a power source secretly taken by the 501st Stormtrooper Legion on Maigito during the Clone Wars. The station would mount a complement of craft, both space and ground, equal to a large planet-side base. 4 capital ships, 100 tie-in starfighters, plus assault shuttles, blast boats, dropships, support craft, and land vehicles, all ultimately totaling in the tens of thousands. It would have an operational crew numbering more than 250,000, including nearly 60,000 gunners alone. The vessel could easily transport more than 500,000 fully outfitted troops, and the support staff, pilots, crew, and other workers, would be half that number. The logistics of it all were staggering. Oh, it would be a fearsome monster indeed, but a monster tamed and under Tarkin's control, a monster sheathed in quadanium steel plating, invulnerable and impervious. Well, almost invulnerable. Lemelisk had disappointed him in that instance. The greatest challenge in designing the battle station, he had said, was not creating a beam cannon big enough to destroy a planet, nor was it building a moon-sized station that would be driven by a Class 3 hyperdrive. The greatest challenge was powering both of them. There must be trade-offs, he had said. In order to mount a weapon of mundicidal means, shielding capabilities would have to be downgraded to a rudimentary level. Power, Bevel had said, was not infinite, even on a station this size, fueled by the largest hypermatter reactor ever built. However, given the surface-to-vacuum defenses, the number of fighters, turbo-laser batteries, charged particle blasters, magnetic rail guns, proton torpedo banks, ion cannons, and a host of other protective devices, no naval ship of any size would be even a remote threat. A fleet of Imperial-class Star Destroyers, even a fleet of Super-class Star Destroyers, should such a thing ever exist, would offer no real danger to the battle station once it was fully operational. Given all that, a shield system that was less than perfect at times wasn't such a high price to pay for the ability to vaporize a planet. Once the station was fully online, then the Tarkin Doctrine, officially recognized by the Empire and named as such, would hold sway throughout the known worlds. The Tarkin Doctrine was as simple as it was effective. Fear would keep the galaxy in line. Once the power of this Death Star had been demonstrated, its very existence would be enough to maintain peace. The Rebel Alliance wouldn't dare risk facing it. An insurgent who would gladly accept his own death in the cause would quail at the thought of his entire homeworld being turned to incandescent plasma. Tarkin turned away from the viewport. Already there had been sabotage and setbacks, and more would occur. It was inevitable on a project this size. Slaves had tried to escape, droids had malfunctioned, and men who should have known better had thought to gain personal power through political machinations. In addition to these annoyances, Darth Vader, the Emperor's pet, was wont to show up unannounced now and again to lay his heavy hand upon the whole process. Vader, unfortunately, was beyond Tarkin's command. even though as the first of the new Grand Moffs, he was a man whose whim was law in the entire Outer Rim territories. It was true that Vader's own manner of function was essentially the same philosophy as the Tarkin doctrine, albeit on a smaller scale. Still, it was disquieting to see the man cause an admiral or a general across the room fall over with a mere gesture as if shot. Vader called it the Force, that mystical power that had supposedly been unique to the Jedi and the Sith. Tarkin had seen him knock blaster bolts from the air with his lightsaber, or even at times with naught but his black gauntlets, with no more effort than swatting flitterflies. Vader was something of a conundrum. The Jedi were extinct, so it was said, as were the Sith, and yet the man in black possessed one of the signature weapons favored by both groups, along with the skill to use it. Puzzling. Tarkin had heard it said that Vader was more machine than man underneath that armor. He knew that the cyborg droid, General Grievous, had been able to wield 4 lightsabers at once, so perhaps it was not so surprising after all that Vader was adept with one. No one could say for sure, of course, since no one, except possibly the Emperor himself, knew the identity of the face behind the black helmet's visor. Tarkin, however, had his own theory about the Dark Lord's former life, based on information he'd gleaned from privileged files and conversations, as well as from public records. He'd heard about the supposed death of Anakin Skywalker, the Jedi war hero, on Mustafar, and knew that no body had been found. Of course, it might easily have disappeared in one of the white-hot lava rivers. But was it really just a coincidence that Darth Vader, encased in a life support suit and demonstrating a mastery of the Force supposedly only attained by the most powerful of Jedi, had become the Emperor's new favorite immediately after Skywalker left the scene? Tarkin shrugged. Whoever or whatever Vader was or had become, he was not without great personal power, and it was well known that he had the Emperor's trust. But that didn't matter. All that mattered to Tarkin was that the construction of the battle station was proceeding apace. Should Vader or anyone else attempt to obstruct this, they would be dealt with, summarily and completely. His ultimate dream must be realized. Nothing else was important compared with that. Nothing. Chapter 3.
Imperial prisoner transport ship GL-TB3181 in suborbital trajectory for processing Station 9, Death Star.
Tila Kars sat in her assigned seat, staring at the blank hull next to her. The shuttle had no viewports in the passenger area, so there wasn't much to see save other prisoners. There were maybe 300 such, males and females of perhaps a dozen different humanoid species packed into the transport in tight rows. The smell of various body odors was sour and potent. She saw no other Mirielans such as herself. She knew there were some from her homeworld down on the hellacious world of despair. At least there were if they were still alive. The prison planet was rife with danger. Wild animals, poison plants, violent storms, and extremes of heat and cold due to an erratic orbit. Not a place to which anybody of her species, or most others, would voluntarily go, unless they had a most serious death wish. Tila didn't harbor a death wish, but it mattered little now what she wished. Her right to wish, along with just about every other right, had been taken from her. She was no longer a galactic citizen. As of a standard year ago, she was a criminal and a prisoner. Her crime had been simply to back the wrong political candidate in a planet-wide election on her world. The Emperor had decided that the man running for office was a traitor, as were his most influential supporters. He had thus ordered a score of well-to-do Mirielans to be rounded up, given a speedy trial, and convicted of treason. Given the public outrage over this travesty of justice, it had been deemed politically inexpedient to execute them then and there, and so Tila and her compatriots had been shipped off to die on a world many light years away, a world so dangerous and inhospitable that it almost seemed to have been designed for the sole purpose of being a prison planet. It had been quite a shock to be among those so chosen. In the span of a single planetary rotation, she had gone from being an influential and well-to-do professional to a criminal, and had existed in the latter state for a standard year. She had been lucky and astonished to have survived that long. She had been an architect, specializing in encapsulated arcology design, not a profession that prepared one for survival in a world where every other animal slinking around considered you prey, or every other plant had thorns from which a tiny scratch could cause agonizing pain before its poison killed you. Before her fall from grace, she had been near the top of her game, a much sought-after professional who had designed the Routhhawk encapsulization on Corellia and the Black Star Wheel world in the Sagar system. She had been feted and lionized, a guest of monarchs and senators, heads of industry and Starfleet admirals. She had thought nothing of taking an Atmos skimmer halfway around Muriel to dine with friends on different continents for each meal. Now just having a dinner that didn't bite back was a luxury. She had been lucky, but her survival hadn't been entirely due to luck. Her father had been fond of the outdoors, and as a young girl she had gone camping with him frequently. He had taught her woodcraft, and while the plants and animals on the prison world Despair were different from those on Muriel, to say the least, the principles of dealing with them were the same. If it had teeth and claws, it was best to avoid it. If it had thorns or serrated edges, it was not a good idea to stray too close. One kept one's awareness firmly in the here and now, and did not indulge in the luxury of daydreams and reverie, unless one was safely barricaded behind makeshift walls constructed of cast-off battle plate or jury-rigged fields. And it was a good idea not to let one's guard drop even then, because there were predators inside the compounds as well as out. Predators with 2 legs instead of 4 or 6, but nonetheless deadly. 1 year. And until this morning, there had been no reason for her to believe she would ever leave Despair, however much time she might have left to live. But when Imperial guards landed outside the makeshift shanty town the prisoners had named Dungeon Town, the rumor had quickly spread. There was a project in orbit, the word was, and they needed more labor.
I hear they got 20,000 Wookiee slaves working this thing,
the man sitting to her right said. He was talking to the prisoner on his right and not Tila, but as close as he was, she'd have to be deaf to miss the conversation. The prisoner to her right was a Bakuran, coarse and convicted of multiple crimes, according to the bragging he'd been doing to their mutual seatmate. Robbery, gun running, assault, murder. He smelled like slime mold.
That right?
The prisoner, seated one away from Tila, was a Brigian, a tall, purple-skinned humanoid whom Tila had seen in Dungeon Town a few times. The only Brigian in their town, she had heard. He was soft-spoken when he answered the Bakuran, but she'd also heard that he had been an assassin, good enough with his hands that he seldom needed a weapon. There was a story that he had once killed a Viraval, a kind of wolf-sized, saber-toothed rat found only on Despair, with nothing more than a stick, and then cooked and eaten it. Thieves and murderers. Pleasant company for a woman who had, until she had been arrested for a poor political stance, never gotten so much as a sky traffic ticket. Not that she had made that knowledge public. The more dangerous criminals in Dungeon Town thought you were, the greater the chance they would leave you be. When anybody asked her what her crime had been, Tila always just smiled. That tended to make the questioner think twice about whatever his intentions might be toward her.
Yeah,
the Bakuran said.
500,000 droids, plus a load of construction bots. Extruders, shapers, benders like that too. Big sucker they be building, whatever the cark it is.
The purple humanoid shrugged.
Die on the planet, die in space, no matter.
The transport slowed, then stopped. After a moment, there was a clank that vibrated through the ship.
Sounds like a ramp just locked on,
the Brigian said.
Looks like wherever we're going, we're there.
The Bakuran turned to look at Tila, giving her a long up-and-down leer, then a toothy grin.
Wouldn't mind a bunkmate if space be tight,
he said.
You'll do.
Last bunkmate I had accidentally died in his sleep one night.
Tila said. She smiled. The Bakuran blinked.
Yeah?
She didn't say anything further. She just kept smiling. The Bakuran's grin faded. A guard appeared.
Everybody up in single file,
he said. The Brigian was closest to the aisle, the Bakuran behind him, and Tila behind the Bakuran. He kept glancing back at her, quick and nervous looks, as they filed out of the ship and into the sinuous tube of the pressurized ramp. At the entrance to a huge and cold assembly area, Tila saw there were thousands of other prisoners entering through scores of ramps connected to other transports. She could smell the perspiration and fear from the prisoners, mixed with the stale, metallic tang of recycled air. Guards stationed at scanners monitored each incoming line. As each prisoner passed through a scanner, there sounded a musical tone. Reading their implants, she guessed. Most of the notes were the same, but now and again a different tone would sound. A full step lower, and the prisoners connected to them would be separated from the others and directed away from the main body, toward a stairway to a lower level. Maybe 1 in 50, she figured.
Who were they?
She wondered.
Rejects? Culls? People bound for a one-way trip out the nearest airlock?
When Tila passed the scanner's arch, the tone emitted was the lower one. She felt her heart race faster, her breath catch, as the guard brusquely ordered her to step out of the line. Whatever that sound meant for those it selected, she was apparently about to find out. Chapter 4.
The Soft Heart Cantina, Southern Underground, Grid 19, Imperial City, Coruscant Sector, Core Worlds.
Should I break their skulls?
Rodo asked. Mima Ruthus said,
No, just throw him out.
You're sure? I don't mind.
Much as I admire a man who enjoys his work, I'm asking you to try to curb your enthusiasm.
You're the boss.
From behind the bar, where she occasionally took a turn mixing drinks, the owner of the Soft Heart Cantina watched as Rodo, the pub's peacekeeper, went to attend to the off-duty and getting progressively louder customers. That there were 2 Imperial stormtroopers soused and gearing themselves up for a fight didn't worry her. Rodo, if he had another name, nobody she knew had ever heard it, was one of the biggest humans she had ever seen. Born and raised on Ragith III, a descendant of human colonists who had been genetically bred and selected for generations to adapt to the 1.5 standard G environment, Rodo, at over 2 meters and 110 kilos, was not a man you wanted to have mad at you. Somebody once parked a land speeder in his spot on the street outside the cantina. Rodo had considered this an insult, and he had been direct in dealing with it. Seeing a vehicle picked up and turned over without help makes an impression. People didn't park in Rodo's spot anymore. He was also extremely fast and very, very good at some weird kind of martial art, which he could use to tie a drunk and belligerent patron into a knot faster than you could call the Imperial Cools to come and haul the problem away. Rodo's presence was why things tended to stay pretty quiet in the cantina, even on a payday like tonight. When somebody got too loud or combative, usually Rodo's arrival at the table was enough to solve the problem. Usually, but not always. Mima turned to finish a drink order. She saw, out of the corner of her eye, a human male, a spacer by his garments, gazing dreamily at her, chin supported by one hand as he leaned over his drink. She gave no acknowledgement of his admiration. A Rutian Twi'lek from Ryloth, with teal skin that seemed to glow under the full-spec lights. She was used to such looks. Her skin, in both color and tone, was one of her best features, which she tended to showcase by wearing short and sleeveless dresses. She knew that to most humanoid races, she was startlingly beautiful. Even her lekku, the 2 large fleshy tendrils that hung about her shoulders instead of human hair, seemed to have an erotic attraction for humans. And she was fit enough due to a daily swimming and zero-G workout regimen, although it always seemed to her that she could stand to lose a kilo from her hips. Mima had managed this place for 2 years and owned it for 2 more before the galaxy had gone crazy. Of course, war was good for business in a cantina. Beings about to ship off to battle in the middle of nowhere on some back-rocket planet knew they wouldn't be relaxing in a place like hers the few times they weren't blasting rebels or droids. This tended to promote a certain to-vac with tomorrow attitude, which translated into considerable profits for her. The Heart was crowded, and it took Rodo a minute to work his way to the would-be fighters, who were at a 2-seat table near the east wall.
What you say?
One of them was on his feet, and the other rising, when the big bouncer arrived. He was a head taller and nearly as wide as both of them put together. He eclipsed the light, and both men looked up to see what was casting such a gigantic shadow. Mima grinned again. There was no way she could hear what Rodo was saying to them. The place was noisy with conversation and laughter, the clink of glasses toasting, the scrape of chair legs on the hard floor. She had 2 more tenders working the bar, both busily mixing drinks and drawing down the taps. It wasn't a quiet environment, but she knew essentially what the big man was telling the 2 troopers. They had disturbed the spirit of the Heart, and they would have to leave now. If they were wise, they'd smile and nod and hustle themselves to the door. If they were stupid, they'd argue with Rodo. If they were really stupid, one or both would decide that how they behaved wasn't any of the Peacekeepers' business, and they'd be happy to demonstrate their Imperial combat training to him. Thank you very milking much. Rodo's response was always based on their attitude. Play nice, and they could come back tomorrow and start fresh, with no hard feelings. It went on a sliding scale from there. In this case, the 2 must have decided that the Enforcer wasn't as tough as he looked, and worth at least a few choice words, probably concerning his parents or siblings and his immoral relationships with them. Before either trooper could do or say anything else, Rodo grabbed each one by the shirt front, moving incredibly fast for such a big man, and in an amazing display of raw strength, lifted both clear of the floor and banged their heads together.
Oh!
If they weren't unconscious after that, they were certainly stunned enough to cease hostilities. Holding them thus, Rodo walked toward the door, as if doing so was no more effort than carrying 2 large steins of ale. It didn't take him long to achieve the exit. Everybody between him and the door moved with great alacrity, clearing a broad and empty path. The room went almost quiet as the door hissed open, and Rodo tossed the 2 into the street. When the door hissed shut, the noise level returned to normal, and Mima went back to her drink order. Nobody was hurt, and so there was no need to worry about the authorities. And if the troops were foolish enough to come back with others like them, seeking to exploit their Imperial status, well, there wasn't an overabundance of support down levels for such officiousness. Mima sighed. When she'd first started in this line of work, waitressing in a dive deep in gnarly town called Villeneuve, most of the Imperial troops had still been clones, and every one of them had been uniformly polite and easygoing. It was true that after a bit too much ferment, they could get a tad boisterous, but they'd never been a problem, and had also never been at all hesitant in helping to street anyone who was. She'd heard that they'd all been programmed somehow to only show hostility toward the enemy. Whatever the reason, the clones had been a pleasure to serve. Well, that was then and this was now. Maybe she was looking at the past through rose-colored drop-tacks, but it seemed to her that a lot had changed. Now a night when Rodo didn't have to eject a few obstreperous drunks was a night to remember. As she put together a bantha blaster, stirring in the ingredients, Mima noticed another pair of customers. They weren't causing any ruckus. If anything, they were too quiet. Humans, a male and a female, they were, like much of the crowd this time of the evening. Both were dressed in nondescript black coveralls. They nursed mugs of membrosia and sat facing each other at a 2-seat table in the corner, from which they seemed, without being obvious about it, to be watching the room. And even though she never caught them staring directly her way, Mima got the distinct feeling that they were particularly interested in her. Rodo arrived back at the bar like a heavy gravity crawler docked. He scanned the room looking for more trouble. None seemed to be in the offing at the moment. Mima finished the blaster and put it on the bar.
L9, order up.
The new server droid, a trash can-sized one on wheels, whose model she never could remember, rolled to the bar.
Thought it was...
It chirped. It grabbed the tray with extendable arms, anchored it to the magnetic plate atop its head, and took off to deliver the drinks. Mima drifted down to the other end of the bar.
Rodo, you see the two in black in the corner.
Rodo didn't look at the pair, nor directly at her.
Yep.
Know who they are?
Not who. Haven't seen them in here before. Got a good idea what, though.
There was a long pause that Mima finally broke.
You want to finish that thought and educate me here?
He cracked a small smile. Rodo liked her, though he'd never made a move on her, and she knew he never would.
Imperial Intelligence Ops.
She frowned, surprised. What would a couple of eyes be doing in her place? She ran a working beings bar, and there wasn't much likelihood of any high-level skullduggery or spying being done here. This was the Southern Underground, after all. Most underdwellers couldn't even spell espionage, much less engage in it.
You sure?
Pretty much. They got the look. You want, I can poke around some, check them out.
She shook her head.
No, don't stir up trouble we don't need. Just keep an eye on them.
Rodo settled back.
That's what you pay me for, boss lady.
Chapter 5.
Officer Barracks, ISD Steel Talon, Horror System.
Master Chief Petty Officer 10 Granite rolled out of his sleep rack and put his bare feet onto the cold metal deck. That woke him up fast enough.
Really ought to get a rug to put down there.
He'd been meaning to do it since he'd been assigned to the ship 8 weeks ago. But other things kept taking priority. And neither Saran Droot nor Velvely, the other CPOs who shared the cabin, seemed bothered by it. Of course, Droot's feet were more like hooves, and Velvely was used to temperatures a lot colder. The blasted floor might feel warm to his feet for all 10 knew. Those two were on graveyard shift this week, so they'd be heading back to the cabin about the time he got to his post. 10 mentally shrugged. Someday, he'd get around to it. Maybe cozy up to that Alderaan woman who did knitting when off duty. Get her to make him enough of a synth-wool carpet to cover the deck. It wouldn't take all that much. He could always sweet-talk a femme into doing all kinds of things for him. He padded down the hall to the refresher, took a quick sonic shower, splashed Deep Hill on his stubble and wiped it clean. Then, wrapped in a towel, he went back to don the uniform of the day. 10 Granite was past 50, but he was in very good shape for a man his age. He had a few unrevised scars from various battles when his station had been hit by enemy fire, or from when something had gone wrong and blown up, and a couple from cantina rumbles when he'd been slow to get out of the way of a broken bottle or vibroblade. Still, he was lean and muscular, and he could keep up with grunts half his age, though not as easily as he used to. The days when he could party all night and then work a full shift the next day were past, true. But on the obstacle course, even the newbies knew enough not to get in front of him unless they wanted to get run over. It was a point of pride that, even after more than 30 years in the Navy, nobody in 10 Granite's gunnery crew could outdrink, outfight, or outwomanize him. He picked out his oldest uniform clothes, the light gray, faded to the color of ash, and slipped into them. They were going to get dirty and smelly anyway today, so no point in messing up new ones. Word from up levels was there was going to be another surprise battle drill around mid-shift. The Port Heavy Blaster Station's CO, Captain Nast Hobart, was a drinking buddy with Lieutenant Colonel Lua, who was the Admiral's assistant. And as a result, the PHBS always got the heads up when a drill or inspection was about to be sprung. The captain wanted his unit to look good, and since they always knew in advance when it counted, they always did look good. White glove a surface in any of the 6 turbo laser turrets, or 2 heavy ion cannon turrets, and there wouldn't be a speck of dirt. You could eat off the floor in fire control on inspection days. Light the battle alarms, and the port battery was the first to report battle ready. Every time. Rumor was that Hobart was up for Major, and his unit's pretty much spotless performance during every drill and inspection didn't hurt his chances any. Not that the blaster crew had any slouches on it. You didn't get to shoot the big guns unless you had plenty of practice shooting the little ones, and anybody who couldn't pull his weight, 10 got rid of fast enough to leave friction burns. He had his own reputation to keep up. CPO-10 Granite was the best gunnery chief in this being's navy. If somebody gave them a target, and it could possibly be hit, his crew would hit it. Sure as there were little green beings living on Kristen 5. Dressed, 10 looked at himself in the mirror. A face that was every centimeter the grizzled old Navy chief looked back at him. He grunted. He joined the Imperial Navy before it was the Imperial Navy, and he expected to die at his post. That was fine by him. A lifetime of military service wasn't a bad life at all, as far as he was concerned. He left his quarters and headed into the hall. The Steel Talon was the 9th ship upon which he'd served. On the last 4 of them, his duty had been that of a gunnery chief. An Imperial-class Star Destroyer, the Talon was the backbone of the fleet. 10 hoped to be transferred one day to one of the 4 new Super-class Star Destroyers that were currently being built. Those were monsters indeed. 8 or 10 times the size of the Imperial-class ships, which were themselves over 1.5 kilometers in length. The SSDs looked like nothing so much as pie-shaped wedges sliced out of an asteroid and covered with armament. Perhaps if he called in the right favors at the right time, he might wrangle an assignment on the next one scheduled to roll ponderously out of the Kuat Drive yards. He still had a few good years left in him, and who better to run the big battery on one of those monster ships than him? He had his request in, and maybe if Hobart got his promotion, he'd put in a good word for 10 before he left. As long as Hobart was running the battery, though, that wasn't likely to happen. He didn't want to lose the best CPO in the sector, so he said.
Well,
thought 10.
It's nice to be appreciated.
Still, he knew deep down that he wouldn't be satisfied until he could say he'd run the biggest and the best. Shift change was coming, and officers and crew filled the halls on their way to their duty stations. Even though it would only be a drill, 10 was looking forward to hearing the generators whine as the capacitors loaded, followed by the heavy vibrations and scorched air smell as the ion cannons and lasers spoke, spewing hard energy across empty space to destroy the practice targets. To be able to reach out 100 clicks or more and smash a ship to atomic dust was real power, and nobody was better at it than he was. 10 got to the array 5 minutes early, as always. 50 meters in diameter, the unit was quiet as shift change neared. He saw Chief Droot and nodded at him.
Chief, how are we doing?
Ship shape 10.
The big Chagrian, one of the few aliens to rise to any kind of rank in the Imperial Navy, glanced around.
You know there's a surprise drill at 11:30 hours?
Yeah.
We cleared the decks, got the caps charged, ready to blaze.
10 grinned.
Thanks, Droot. I owe you one.
No, I'm still too down. You had the station shining like a mirror on that last in Specs Hun. I got a smile out of the Admiral himself that time.
10 nodded. Everybody kept track of who owed who what on a ship. And you didn't let a fellow chief catch flack if you could help out. Even if it wasn't your watch, it was your station. And what made one look bad made them all look bad. And vice versa, of course.
Station's yours,
Droot said.
I'm gonna go get some supper. I hear the mess hall has some Berbersian crab on the menu.
More likely doctored soy pro,
10 said. Droot shrugged.
Yeah, well, it's the Navy, not the UHZ for Star.
He left, ducking to make sure his horns cleared the hatch. The morning shift crew was already in place. CPO-10 Granite wanted his people on station 15 minutes early, and if you weren't, you'd be sorry. Once, and you got your rump chewed like a starved reek was gnawing on it. Twice and you were looking for another job.
Good morning, people.
10 said.
Morning, Chief.
Morning.
Morning, Chief.
Came the echo from the crew.
Polish your buttons, boys.
The chief said.
I don't want anything sticking just in case we have to shoot something today.
Most of the crew smiled. They knew all about the drill. They were all ready. None of them wanted to be the being who disappointed Master Chief Petty Officer Granite. No, sir.
Medical frigate Midstar 4, polar orbit, despair.
Captain Dr. Cornell Davini?
Yulee nodded.
Yeah.
Medical Technician Class 2 Verley, sir.
The man said. Human, as Yulee was. Or at least close enough that he couldn't tell otherwise. And Yulee was something of an expert on humanoid anatomy.
This way, sir.
The Meditech led him down featureless gray corridors deeper into the ship, to an office complex. Yulee marked the route half-consciously, knowing he could find his way around pretty quickly if need be. He had a good sense of direction. Though it wasn't anything he could claim credit for, he'd been born that way. Sure enough, it was the medical admin section he found himself in. Ship's medical suites all looked alike. The same pale, off-white walls, wide corridors, and color-coded luminescent floor stripes that led you to various departments. There were a dozen or so people working, secretaries mostly, some biologicals, some droids. The hands-on medical stuff would be done elsewhere down the hall, he knew.
Commander Hotis, Dr. Cornell Davini.
Hotis was a short, rotund man, probably 70 or so, with white hair and a cropped beard. He wore office grays, and the clothes were cut well enough that they had to be tailored. He was checking off a list on a flat screen. He looked up, nodded at the tech.
Thanks, Verley.
The tech nodded, said,
Sir,
and left.
Welcome to Medstar 4, Doctor.
Hotis said.
Glad to have you aboard.
Yulee nodded.
Thank you, sir,
he said. His apparent lack of enthusiasm must have showed. The old man cocked an eyebrow that had more hair than a leaf crawler.
Not happy with this assignment, son?
That earned Yulee's new commander an incredulous look.
Not happy? I did my first tour in a Rimsu unit on a swamp world where your lungs could fill with spores in 5 minutes if you weren't wearing a filter mask. I patched up maybe 1,000 clones, and I was supposed to be rotated back to my homeworld and discharged a civilian at the end of it. That was 5, 6 hitches ago. I lost track.
Hotis nodded.
IMSLO,
he said.
That's right.
IMSLO stood for Imperial Military Stop-Loss Order. Too many skilled people who'd been drafted had had enough of the military after the Clone Wars, and when their compulsory service ended, wanted nothing more than to go home. With the action against the rebels heating up, the Empire couldn't allow that. Doctors in particular were in short supply. Hence, IMSLO, a retroactive order mandating that no matter when you'd been conscripted, once you were in for as long as they wanted you, or until you got killed. Either way, it was kiss your planned life goodbye. Imperial Military Stop-Loss Order. An alternative translation, scrawled no doubt on a fresher wall somewhere by a clever graffitist, had caught on over the last few years. I'm milking scragged. Life's over. The memory brought a faint, grim smile to Yulee's lips.
Sorry, son,
his CO said.
It's not my policy.
But you are career Navy.
The older man nodded.
We each have our chosen path.
Not exactly true, is it? If I was on my chosen path, probably you and I would never have met.
Hotis shrugged.
What can I say? I don't run things back in civilization. I just do what I'm told. We were short a surgeon. I requisitioned a replacement. You're him. If you weren't here, you'd be someplace else where the Empire deemed you necessary. It ain't Imperial Center General or Big Zoo, but it's quiet here. Not like a Rimsu tent out in the tall grass. Nobody is shooting at us. Most of what we see is the occasional industrial accident or normal wear and tear. You could do better, Captain, but you could also do a lot worse. War is ugly, but that's how it is.
Yes, sir.
Oh, you can drop that part, and we're pretty informal around here. I'll have a droid show you to your quarters, and you can take the tour and settle in.
Hotiz looked at Yuli's orders.
Says here you're originally from Tatooine, Dr. Davini.
Yuli.
Hotiz squinted at him.
Beg your pardon, son?
People call me Yuli. It's a Tuscan word. Means...
An alarm blared, cutting him off. Yuli didn't need a translation. Incoming. A secretary droid rolled up on a single wheel. Its gyroscope squeaked a little right at the edge of Yuli's hearing as the spinning wheel kept the droid upright and stable. It stopped in front of Hotiz.
Sir, Ambulance Ship 9 is on the way to Dock B with 12 workers injured by an oxygen tank explosion at the construction site.
Yuli noticed that the droid's vocabulator had, for whatever reason, a kind of musical lilt that he found pleasant. It was as though the droid were a character from a light opera, about to burst into song at any moment.
It should be arriving in 6.5 minutes.
The droid continued.
Field medics list primary damage due to compressive injuries, shrapnel wounds, and vacuum ruptures. 4 critical, 2 of those in shock, 3 moderate, 5 minor. Species breakdown is 6 Wookiees, 3 humans, 1 Syrian, 1 Ugnaught, 1 Gungan.
Yuli frowned. That was an interesting mix. 6 Wookiees? Working for the Empire? That didn't seem right.
So much for quiet,
he said.
Which way to emergency receiving?
You don't have to jump right in yet,
Hotiz said. Yuli shrugged.
Might as well. It's what I do.
Hotiz nodded.
Formio will show you.
He nodded at the droid.
Leave your gear here. I'll have it taken to your quarters.
The droid said.
This way, Dr. Davini.
In a pleasant tenor. Its wheels squeaked as it rolled down the hall. Yuli followed. Chapter 6.
Slashtown Prison Colony, Grid 4354, Sector 547, Quadrant 3, Planet Despair.
As a Zoloshan, Salat Ratchuadil could, if pressed, live on sunlight and water, at least for a while. He didn't know his species' origin, but he did know that his people all had green eyes and green blood. While nobody outside the species had ever been curious enough to do full genetic scans, the theory that there had been some unique melding of animal and plant in the dawn of Zoloshan history was accepted as fact on his home world. Sunlight and a little water, and he could go a month, 2 months, without eating a bite, though he'd rather not. He'd rather eat a nice meal of bamat steak and phyllo eggs, and as long as he was rathering, he'd much rather be home on Zelos than on a prison world full of nasty criminals. Unfortunately, that wasn't how it was. He looked around the inside of the rude hut in which he lived, a ramshackle collection of local wood and cast-off Imperial packing crates, lashed together with vines, wire, and bits of twine. Not much, but it was home. He rolled off the pad he used for a bed, essentially a blanket over some evergreen boughs. Fresh and layered right, it was pretty comfortable. The branches were getting dry, though. It had been a couple of standard weeks since he'd changed them. He'd have to do that soon. Not only were dry branches uncomfortable, but scorpion slugs would quickly infest them, and one sting from a slug's tail could cause members of just about any humanoid species agony for weeks, if they were lucky. For the 1000th time, Ratua mentally railed against the bad luck that had sent him here. Yes, he was a thief, though not much of one. And yes, he'd been a smuggler, though he'd never made any real credits at it. He was a pretty good scrounger, which helped him survive here. And he was not above taking advantage of a poor trader in a spirited transaction now and again. But being scooped up in a Tregalis port pub that just happened to have a pirate gang in it, and being lumped in as one of their crew, that was wrong. All he had done was stop in for a mug of ferment. The fact that he'd been doing a little haggling with one of the pirates over some Milwikian silk that had fallen from a commercial hover van earlier didn't mean he was a member of the crew. The judges, unfortunately, had not been convinced. Ratua had offered to undergo a truth scan, but somebody would have to pay for that, as he didn't have the coin. And the judges weren't willing to spend taxpayers' credits when he was so obviously guilty of something, even if it wasn't this particular crime on this particular world. And so he'd been tossed in with a crowd of hard-bitten types, all of them wedged into a cargo hold not big enough for half their number, and summarily tossed off the planet. Being on a prison planet with some seriously bad criminals was not a walk in a quiet park. Even without the exiled thieves, murderers, extortionists, and so on, Despair wouldn't be anyone's first choice to build a winter home. The land was mostly jungle, consisting of one large continent and one considerably larger ocean. The rampant growth was nourished by a gravity level of less than 3/4 a standard G, and by seasonal gales that roared in from the distant ocean, fueled by tidal forces due to the erratic orbit. The jungle flora and fauna had responded to the environmental challenge of the gales by producing large, close-knit growth that stabbed roots deep into the ground. In some places, the entwined rainforest was totally impenetrable. The animal life had adapted as well by becoming, for the most part, sinuous and serpentine, the better to forage through the tightly interwoven vines and boles. There were poisonous crustaceans, as well as a few flying creatures, such as small winged lizards, and manta-like things, the latter with an interesting life cycle that began in the ocean and ended in the jungle. And everything seemed to be the most vicious, savage, and generally unpleasant representative of its species possible. It wasn't so much an interdependent ecological system as it was all-out biological war, with each of Despair's myriad indigenous species seemingly hardwired to attack and destroy all others. Everything that moved, it seemed, had fangs that dripped venom, and everything rooted to the ground had poisonous thorns, barbs, burrs. And on top of all that, there were the prisoners. The guards, safe in their floating patrol barges, were there to make sure nobody escaped. Short of that, the prisoners could do pretty much whatever they wanted to one another, and not a night went by without somebody being thumped, sometimes hard enough that they died. It was the law of the jungle in here, just as it was out there, and the big predators ruled. They took what they wanted, and if you objected, you got squashed. Ratua tried to keep a low profile. If they didn't notice you, they weren't as likely to take you out just for the sport of it. He kept his mouth shut and his head down, and concentrated on survival. He washed his face, using fairly clean water in a stasis field generator dome, then headed outside. Sergeant Nova Steele, one of the more easygoing of the guards, taught a self-defense class nearby every morning. Mostly the students were other guards, but there were some prisoners, and Ratua enjoyed watching other people sweat. Plus, it was a gathering in which biz could be conducted. Swap a little of this for a little of that. Get by a little better. Ratua had a pretty good biz going, bartering goods and services, and that helped buy off the predators who did spot him now and then. Say, fellow being, which would you rather do? Stomp me into green mush, or get a new battery for your music player? Among criminals, as among most people, greed was pretty dependable. Ratua arrived shortly at the cleared spot where the self-defense players gathered. There were 18 or 20 of them, plus about that many prisoners and guards watching. He circulated, hoping to find somebody with a couple of spare sunfruits he could score for breakfast. Sergeant Steele was talking about what to do if somebody attacked you with a knife, as Ratua worked his way around the gathering.
Anybody know the first thing you do if somebody comes at you with a blade?
Steele asked.
Run like a fleeter beaster,
somebody said. To the general laughter, Steele replied,
You took this class before?
More laughter.
Mon has it exactly right,
the sergeant continued.
You make tracks away fast as you can. Bare-limbed against a knife, you get cut. No ifs, no buts. And unless you scum of the galaxy have been industrious since last time I looked, You don't have much of a med center anywhere around these parts. You could get cut bad, bleed out, or get infected, and leave the party by the slow and painful exit, right?
There was a murmur of agreement. Everybody knew that. Lose a body part here. It was gone for good if you weren't a natural regenerator. The state of local medicine was rudimentary. A few docs and other healers, but not a lot of equipment or meds. Of course, the closest Bacta tank was a mere 300 or so clicks away. Unfortunately, the direction was vertical rather than horizontal, and most of the prisoners had few illusions about their chances of being hoisted up to the orbiting facility if they were in harm's way.
But if you don't have a weapon and you can't run, then you need another option. And it has to be one that doesn't depend on great skill, because it won't work unless you have that. And even then, maybe not.
Sergeant Steele looked around.
Hey, Ratua, let me borrow you for a minute.
Ratua smiled. He'd done this before.
A lot of self-defense teachers, they say you have to trap and control the knife arm.
Steele continued.
And that, not to put too fine a point on it, is pure Mopac. If you aren't faster than the guy with the knife, that gets you gutted, no matter how much you know.
Ratua strolled into the ragged circle made by the watchers. Steele tossed him the practice knife, a forearm-length dagger made out of soft flex. Stiff enough to work like a real knife, but with enough give that if you hit somebody with it, it would bend without doing damage. The point and edges were coated with a harmless red dye that left a temporary mark on whatever they touched.
I'm 12 years deep in Terrascasi,
Steele said.
I was the first Naval Fleet's unarmed middleweight champion 2 years, runner-up for 2 more. Bare hand-to-hand, I expect I can take anybody my size on this planet apart. Doesn't matter which species. Blade to blade, I can duel to a draw. Bare against a knife, I'll get cut. Show 'em, Ratua.
Ratua smiled and stepped in as if he was in no hurry. He made a lazy thrust with the knife. Steele went into a crouching move to grab his arm. Only Ratua did his trick. As the sergeant reached for his wrist, Ratua pulled his hand back, and while it looked like no big deal to him, he knew the watchers would see his hand blur. It wasn't a Zillotian thing. It was Ratua's own. He didn't know where it had come from. But once he kicked in the booster rocket, he was, for a short time, faster than most ordinary beings. Way faster. Some medic who'd examined him once and tried to clock his reflex time had said something about mutation, about abnormally fast nastic response in the cellulose fiber that made up a large part of his muscle mass. Whatever the cause, it had come in handy more than once during his exile on Despair. As the sergeant continued to move in what seemed like slow motion to Ratua, the latter whipped up the knife and made 3 quick slashes and a stab. Then he took a step back. Time resumed normal speed. Several people who had never seen the demonstration gasped or swore. Sergeant Steele had 2 thin red lines across his neck, one on each side, another across his throat, and a little red dot under his rib cage just below his heart. After the sounds of amazement had died down, Steele said,
You see?
He turned to Ratua.
How much fight training you have, Ratua?
Counting today?
He grinned.
That would be none.
Steele pointed at the slashes and stab marks.
Any of these would have been enough to kill me. Green Eyes here has no training. I'm an expert, but if that knife had been real, I'd be fertilizing the plants. If somebody bothered to bury me. Yeah, he's fast. Freaky fast. But that's the point. You never know who or what you're going to be up against, especially here on Despair. Makes you stop and think, doesn't it? Thanks, Ratua.
Ratua nodded and moved out of the circle. These occasional little demonstrations were another reason he managed to stay alive. Predators preferred helpless victims. And while Ratua wasn't a fighter, the sight of blood, even if it wasn't green, made him ill. There were a lot slower folks to prey upon. Why risk your neck if you didn't have to? Steele would go on to talk about position and preemptive strikes and such. But Ratua had heard it all before. He was more interested in finding a sunfruit, and after his moment in the spotlight, that would probably be easier. Everybody loved a star. Most days, Sergeant Nova Steele felt as if he was part of the solution and not part of the problem. Being a guard on a prison planet was, at best, not a particularly glamorous duty. In fact, even at its best, you could carbon freeze it and it would still stink to high orbit. He'd much rather be out in the thick of things, fighting rebels on a real field of battle, using his hard-earned skills where they'd matter the most. But somebody had to be here, and he was philosophical enough to shrug off the fact that he'd been one of those so assigned. He'd learned a long time ago to make the best of the situation. That was all you could do if you were a trooper in the Imperial Army. He remembered a quote from the Merlissi philosopher Javik. "I know myself to be only as I appear to myself." It was a deceptively complex concept, couched in simple words. Nova smiled slightly as he thought of the probable reaction his fellow soldiers would have if they knew that the hollows hidden beneath his bunk were not racy images of Twi'lek dancing girls, but rather dissertations on various schools of metaphysical thought detailed by the galaxy's finest philosophers. Not that he had anything against Twi'lek dancing girls, but his studies over the last few years of his post here had kept him sane. Of that he was convinced. Most of the prisoners were indeed the dregs of the galaxy, bad beings who had broken major laws and who deserved to be put away for life, if not jettisoned from the back of a star destroyer along with the rest of the garbage. A few had been collected and shipped here by bad luck or accident, though he knew that most of those weren't exactly pillars of society either. Ratua was a good example of this, although Nova owed him big time for getting in the hollows with only an eyebrow raised in reaction. But the vegetable man was an exception. If you check the data on the majority, you'd probably find that most of them had gotten away with some full-out evil hurt aimed at the rest of whatever world they came from. So you didn't feel too bad about them being here. There weren't too many of the truly innocent who wound up on despair, though he knew of a few. Political prisoners, most of them. Backed the wrong candidate, spoke up at the wrong time, didn't toe the party line. Nova felt some sympathy for those, though given how the galaxy was these days, probably more sympathy than they deserve. If you're dumb enough to stand in front of a riot trooper and make an obscene gesture at him, you ought not to be surprised if he shoots you. Troopers were people, they had feelings, and on a bad day, dancing in front of one and calling him names could be a very bad idea. It was the same thing with politics. Anybody with more than vestigial sensory organs could tell which way the imperial wind was blowing, and there was a war on, even though it hadn't been officially named as such. Free speech sometimes had to be tempered for the good of society, and what would have been a spirited discussion, back when the Republic was in full flower, was often now considered treason. That bothered him some. Maybe not as much as it should have, but some. Nova sighed. Despite his fascination with the conundrums posed by some of the galaxy's foremost scholars, he didn't consider himself a particularly deep thinker. He just did what he was told, which mostly consisted of keeping prisoners in line and trying to avoid situations in which he had to shoot them. Teaching self-defense classes he did on his own time. It helped some of the weaker inmates, maybe gave them a chance against the real predators here. At any rate, it made him feel better about himself. He liked a level playing field, and while his classes weren't going to accomplish that, they did smooth out a bump in the terrain here and there. Now and again he'd hear a story about how someone from his classes used what he taught to avoid being maimed or killed, and that made him feel good. He was pretty careful screening his would-be prisoner students. Yes, they were all crooked as sand snakes, but he tried to keep out the ones who were aggressive, the ones who'd take what he taught them and use it for something other than self-defense. He had a lot of smaller beings as students, weaker ones, and those convicted of crimes that were about money rather than violence. He absolutely did not want to make a stone killer better at killing. More than enough of that went on in the galaxy already, much of it right here on Despair. His comlink chirped on his belt, signaling the morning recall. Time to wrap up the class and get back to the guard station, check in, get his next assignment. Some of the other guards thought he was foolish for mingling with the prisoners. You didn't get to carry a blaster or even a shock baton unless you went out in a quad or a platoon-sized group, for fear that the prisoners would attack you and take your weapon. But Nova wasn't concerned about that. The really bad actors here knew enough not to mess with him barehanded, and if they pulled a beam or projectile weapon and took him out, they knew the chances were excellent. They'd be dead before the next sunrise. Guard troops took care of their own, and if you attacked one, you attacked them all. They were protective of one another, but there were limits observed for the greater good. If you took a guard hostage and tried to use him or her or it for leverage, it got you and the guard, and anybody within 100 meters, turned into a smoking crater. No negotiation, no compromise. Just a big, sleek thermal bomb arcing out of the compound and onto your position. You couldn't hide, because the bomb zeroed in on the guard's implant, which couldn't be turned off or destroyed unless you knew exactly where it was. And that location was different for every guard on the planet. You'd have to completely skin the guard alive before finding it. And while that wasn't a deal-breaker for a lot of the planetary inmates, more in fact like a bonus for some of them, the catch was that even if you killed the guard, the implant kept working and reported its wearer dead, which meant the bomb was on its way, and not even a fleet of Beasta with its tails on fire could get out of range in time. This was a big planet, but not so big that they couldn't find you. Knowing this tended to keep a lot of the more violent prisoners in line. Because of all this, not to mention his own considerable skills, Sergeant Nova Steel wasn't worried about going among the scum. Tough beings recognized each other, and nobody looked at him and saw an easy target. And besides all that, he had Blink. The comlink chirped again.
Steel?
Came the lieutenant's voice from it.
Yes, sir.
You gonna play patty cake with those slime beetles all day, or are you coming in?
On my way, Loot.
Chapter 7.
Imperial-class Star Destroyer, Devastator, en route to Horus system.
Darth Vader stood on the bridge of his warship, staring out through the forward viewport at the kaleidoscopic chaos of hyperspace. The effect, even moving at the relatively stately speed of a Star Destroyer, was akin to tumbling down an endless tunnel of amorphous, whirling patterns of light. Starlight and nebulae smeared into impressionistic blotches by the ship's superluminal speed. He knew that even experienced spacers and Navy personnel often hesitated to look out at it. Standard operating procedure was to keep the thick slabs of transparasteel opaqued while traveling through the higher dimensional universe. There was something profoundly wrong about hyperspace, composed as it was of more than the 3 spatial and 1 temporal dimensions that most sentient species were used to. Looking too long into hyperspace promised madness, so the stories went. He had never heard of anyone actually succumbing to hyper-rapture, as it was called. Nevertheless, the legends persisted. Vader enjoyed staring into it. He had of late become aware of the sound of his breathing, the rhythmic and even pulses of the suit's respirator. The mechanical device that helped keep him alive was most efficient, and he usually tuned it out. Now and again, however, usually during quiet or contemplative moments, it would intrude, reminding him that it was the will of his master that he had become what he had become. In many ways, so much less than he had been before. And in other ways, so much more. The creation and construction of the suit had been, perforce, hasty, since the maimed and burned thing that had been Anakin Skywalker was dying, and would not have survived for long even in a Bacta tank. There had been no time to tailor all the life support systems specifically to his needs. Many of the suit's features were adapted from earlier technology, such as had been designed for the cyborg droid, General Grievous, over 2 decades before. It was hardly state-of-the-art. It could, Vader knew, be rebuilt now and made infinitely better, more comfortable and more powerful. There was only one problem with doing so. To be completely excised, even temporarily, from the suit would kill him. Not even the safety of the hyperbaric chamber, indeed not even his command of the dark side, could ensure his protection during such a procedure. Like it or not, the suit and he were one, now and forever.
Lord Vader,
came the voice of the Devastator's captain from behind him. There was only the smallest hint of fear in it, but even that much was obvious to one steeped in the dark side of the Force. Vader felt it as an icy frisson along his nerves, a plangent chord that he alone could hear, a flash of lightning across a darkling plain. Fear was good in others.
Yes.
We are approaching the drop back into real space.
Vader turned and regarded the man.
And?
Captain Pychor swallowed.
Nothing else, my lord. I just thought to inform you.
Thank you, Captain. I am already aware of it.
Yes, my lord. The captain bowed and backed away. Inside the helmet, Vader smiled, though it caused him pain to make the expression. But pain was always with him. A little more meant nothing. It wasn't even necessary to call upon the dark side to deal with it. It was purely a matter of will. The smile faded as he contemplated the immediate future. This trip, he felt, should not be necessary. Governor Wilhuff Tarkin, Grand Moff Tarkin, as he had been recently designated, a ridiculous rank in Vader's opinion, knew his duty. He had been charged by the Emperor to create this behemoth that was supposed to strike fear into the hearts of the rebels. And certainly he knew what would happen to him if he failed in his duty. Tarkin's philosophy was sound. Fear was a useful tool, and the battle station would undoubtedly be useful, though the power all its vaunted weaponry and battleships could produce paled against the power of the Force. But the Emperor wished it, and so it would happen. There had been, however, setbacks. Accidents, sabotage, delays, and these were troubling to the Emperor. And so Palpatine had sent Vader to, once again, convey his displeasure at these setbacks to Tarkin's pet project, and to suggest, strongly, that the Grand Moff find ways to avoid them in the future. Tarkin was no fool. He would understand the message.
Fail and suffer the consequences.
The Devastator segued from the hallucinogenic chaos of hyperspace to the more stable vista of real space. Vader turned away from the view, his cape swirling about him. Now that they were nearly at their destination, he would be able to spend a few hours in his hyperbaric chamber, free at least of his helmet. Time to reflect on his memories, to allow his anger and rage to rise. And for a brief time, the dark side would feed on that rage and free him of constant pain. The healing never lasted, however. It was impossible to maintain for long, even within the confines of the chamber. As soon as his anger ebbed and his concentration lapsed, he reverted to what he had become, to what Obi-Wan Kenobi, his erstwhile Jedi Master, had made of him. Most of the Jedi had been destroyed. Some of the few who mattered the most, however, had not. Some had escaped. Among them, Yoda. This was disturbing. Old as the green little imp with the querulous voice was, he could still be a threat. Most important, though, was the knowledge that Vader's nemesis still lived. He would have felt it through the Force if the old man had died. Of that he was certain. And this was a good thing, a very good thing indeed. Because someday, somehow, Obi-Wan Kenobi would pay for what he had done to Anakin Skywalker, and it would be Darth Vader who collected the toll. He would strike down Kenobi as he had so many of his fellow Jedi, be they Masters, Knights, or Padawans. Eventually, the inevitable would become reality, and the Jedi would be no more. That thought was worth another painful smile behind the ebon mask. This audiobook was developed 100% using artificial intelligence to generate realistic and familiar voices,